Hello, my name is Sarah Blackburn and I'm the Managing Director of GameOn, a PR agency in the gaming space. When we first started thinking about who the best person we could interview for this panel session, some names were bandied around, but as soon as we mentioned this Jade Zorab, the recently appointed Managing Director of Amber Gaming, it was a no-brainer for all of us. So welcome, Jade.
Thanks so much, Sarah.
So I've been putting some meeting notes together, and it's quite hard to know where to start because we're also friends and we've been working together over the last few years. And so I thought we'd start from the very beginning, and perhaps you could give us a bit of a backstory as to how you moved from South Africa to the Isle of Man and then start working in compliance.
Yeah, yeah, good question. So I moved to the Isle of Man, 8.5 years ago now, from South Africa, from a town on the coast, a beach town called Durban, and it was just really quite a surprise. So my husband is involved in the e-gaming sector. He works for a large, well-known software provider, and he was relocated here together with, well, it was 50 families effectively who moved over to the Isle of Man. In those days, I wasn't involved in the gaming sector at all. I was qualified in marketing and working towards finishing up my LLB in law, and was involved in a totally different sector, in the retail sector, media sector, in fact. And so when I moved over to the Isle of Man, it was just different in every sense of the word, from the weather to the culture, just the whole lot. It was a total whirlwind. And I think, like anything in life, it was just something I had to immerse myself in. And fast forward, I think a couple of months once we had settled, I started working for a local gaming company here, initially involved in the affiliate space. And so combine e-gaming, with affiliates 8 years ago. Wow, what a tornado to walk into. And I think my background, as I said before, marketing, law, quite an unusual combination, gave me a really good footing, I think, into understanding sort of both the commercial and the compliance side of the business. And I think that puts you in quite a unique position. Typically, within organisations, those are two areas that have a lot of conflict because they have competing interests. Often, people who don't understand both sides very well, well, they have a responsibility, I suppose, one to deliver commercially and two, from a compliance perspective, to make sure a business is kept safe. And so, you've got to have, I think, a mutual understanding that those aren't two independent requirements or, ambitions. These areas that need to work together in tandem to make for a successful business. And that was really sort of the start of my career within the gaming sector. I spent several years with that business, and it was just a place I loved, a business I loved, and I learned so much about the gaming world. And affiliates have a mind of their own. It's a different minefield, and that was really interesting back in those days. And then moved to Amber Gaming. It was known under a different name in those days, and that was really the start of my journey within the business here.
Yeah, and interestingly, I suppose because your husband was already in the gaming space, the gaming industry, as we all know, and especially when you talk about every sector, including affiliates, it's always had reputational challenges. So did you have any hesitation yourself getting into the gaming space, or were you quite happy to go feet first?
Yeah, I was happy to go feet first. I think it's probably indicative of just my personality. And I appreciate, most sectors will have challenges of their own. There will be sectors that are more immature than others. I think it's fair to say the gaming sector certainly was in those days. But I think, your skills traverse those sectors, and a lot of it, I think, has got to do with your own attitude, personality, and mindset, and how you react to challenges. And I think, you've got to be agile, you've got to be resilient in business. And so you just take that approach, I think, in anything that you do. And the gaming sector is certainly true of that. I think if you've had the benefit of working within mature sectors before entering something that is relatively less mature, you are at some advantage because you can apply all of those learnings to the new sector, and you can almost see the roadmap and where things may end up to some extent.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I suppose, when I got into the gaming industry in 2005, I mean, obviously compliance was a thing, but it certainly wasn't the bedrock to the gaming industry that it is now. And
No.
it's at the cornerstone of absolutely everything, and I remember meeting one of your colleagues about 2 years ago at a gaming event, and he said, right, you need to help us make compliance sexy. And I thought, of all the briefs I've had as a gaming PR, that was going to perhaps be a more challenging one. But actually, if you think about it, compliance is hot right now,
Absolutely.
so how do you find working with regulators and different jurisdictions, and then working with your clients to ensure that they're keeping compliant?
Yeah, I think you're right. That conversation is something that stays with me as well. And it's compliance, I think, historically is just something that, operators certainly thought was just a function that should be in the corner of the room and it's needs must. And, we see this even in markets who have recently opened up to licensing. There is, such a commercial approach, obviously, because when you're incurring loads of cost, you want to make sure that you can be operational and stop bringing some money in and effectively keeping the lights on, because that is so important. But compliance can't be forgotten about. It is the absolute bedrock of everything that you're doing. And there would be, nothing worse than building a really successful business only to be let down because of a compliance failure. And that really could have been avoided. So even from an aspirational point of view, when businesses are looking to list, governance and compliance mistakes, perhaps from the infancy of a startup business, can have hugely detrimental effects further down the road. So I think the perception in recent years has absolutely shifted as regulations have become more onerous. You only have to look at, the aggressive a response from the UKGC, for example, on all of the fines that we're seeing in the public domain being issued, to understand that compliance is so important. And once you have a license, you've got responsibilities that need to be adhered to. And so it's not just a checkbox exercise. We very much encourage embracing a culture of compliance and effectively making sure that the business is kept safe. By way of working with operators and with regulators, it's been interesting. I think earlier on in our journey, there was a lot of education that needed to happen about the importance of compliance. And helping people understand, compliance is not about business prevention. It is about empowering you with the tools that you need to be able to do everything that you want to do commercially, but to make sure that you're doing that within the parameters that are allowed, and that effectively, particularly for people who hold roles of responsibility, are doing that in a way where you are kept safe, and you're keeping the business safe, and making sure that there's longevity for the business, and ultimately that you've got a viable long-term business. The regulators, we have an excellent relationship with, and the jurisdictions in which we operate. Again, I think in the early days there was an educational piece that needed to be had to understand what the value was that we added. So, are you just a consultancy business that supports, I don't know, operators or businesses on an ad hoc basis and then leaves them to it? Well, no, we aren't about that. We are about embracing this culture of compliance and about educating and helping, the community understand how to implement, policies and procedures. It's one thing to have regulations that are issued. Businesses are busy, and in some jurisdictions there's a real lack of, skilled professionals that can fulfill these roles. And so we rarely try to sit between the regulator and the operators to help them to interpret, to understand, and to apply these rules, if you like, because we find that unless you have had practical experience, it's sometimes really difficult if you're going into a new market to understand what is actually expected of you, sometimes when things aren't prescriptive, or when perhaps certain rules are open to interpretation. So given the vast experience we have in the market with, hundreds of different types of business models, and different types of operators, all with their own aspirations, all operating in different markets, we like to use that expertise to really help in a pragmatic way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you mentioned before about compliance culture, and at the very start, I said you've recently been appointed as managing director at Amber Gaming, and I feel like I should have an applause machine here. We have virtual backgrounds. I feel there's a gap in the market. So congratulations again on that.
Thank
And
you.
I've been obviously following your career over the last few years, and I've always said that you're a wonderful role model for our industry. Now, as your role as managing director for the business, do you have an extra sense of responsibility to embed a different type of culture in the company, as an example? So, everybody's had a very tricky 12, 18 months and working lockdown and remotely. How do you feel now, being the spearhead of this business, about bringing on a company culture, and what does that mean for you?
Yeah, got a really good question. Well, we rebranded to Amber Gaming just over a year ago now, and I think when we did that, there was a lot of consideration given to both our internal culture and the tone that we wanted to set, but also that to the external marketplace, and those are one and the same thing. We are really transparent. We believe that compliance should be applied pragmatically, and that we should be, honest with both our people and our partners and business. And so when we set about shaping that identity, I was really involved in that process together with my colleagues who were on the board, and that was a joint effort. So I think we've got a very solid foundation that we've managed to develop. And to me, it's really about continuing to drive that narrative, to shape it alongside my own personality as time evolves, and to shape it alongside our team and our clients as well. But I think the foundation is solid. I feel a major sense of responsibility. Respect is earned. The transition, for me taking up this role has happened over a period of time. So hopefully feels, fairly organic to our team and to our partners. But I do feel a huge sense of responsibility, and I think you've got to stay on top of it. I've never been afraid of working hard. And I think you've kind of got to muck in and just get involved with your partners, get involved with your team. And that's something that I will continue to drive forward.
And I suppose also the last few months, some of us have got better acquainted with our wine delivery man, and some of us have taken up a lot more fitness and activity. So obviously, I follow you on social media, and you've been doing a lot of marathons and triathlons, and you really kind of upped your fitness. And do you feel that that's really helpful for your mental health and for helping you have clarity of mind in your work capacity?
Definitely. I think in anything in life, and particularly when you've got, a job that is busy, it's so important to have time to think, and to physically, be healthy. So I've always had a passion for running and for swimming. I had a friend that said, well, all you need to do is get a bicycle and then you could do a triathlon. And I thought, you know what, that's a great idea over lockdown. We weren't traveling. And so I did that. And I think you've got to be a good leader. I think you've got to know yourself very well. You've got to be self-aware, because, if you aren't, I just don't think you can make solid and reliable decisions. And for me, I think exercise has become a way to just make sure that I've got a healthy balance, and I'm staying fit and active. And so going out for a run or for a swim or for a bike ride at the beginning or at the end of the day, I think just gives you clarity of mind.
Yeah.
An old colleague of mine, he was one of my bosses, said something to me that always stuck with me, and he said, Jade, just sleep on it. And I think, that phrase isn't used often enough. Sometimes when you've got a really, really big decision to make, that's good advice. Just take a pause, be considered in your approach. And I've taken that a step further, maybe run on it or swim on it, but basically just give yourself that time and that clarity of mind. Don't always act with haste. I think you need to be decisive, but taking an hour or two or an overnighter to just sleep on it, particularly where it is a complex decision that has far-reaching consequences. That's sort of my way of I suppose just processing and dealing with things. And the other thing I think is you do need to lead by example. We've got an active team, a team that's fit, who likes to be involved in things. Again, I think to maintain morale over the last 12 months has certainly been a challenge. People have had, to manage working from home, being a teacher, being a wife or a husband, parenting, colleague, all those things. And that's been really difficult for everyone. I think everyone's had their own challenges in that regard. So we try to encourage things over lockdown, join Strava and let's see who can, walk however many miles. We've done some races on the Isle of Man. So our team recently entered a 100-mile relay around the island called Race the Sun, which was an aid of the Children's Centre here on the Isle of Man. And again, I think that's just a phenomenal team building exercise. Everyone who was involved, was from within our business. They weren't all necessarily, runners or hadn't competed in long distance running before. And, the race is not really about the individual because it's a relay. When you're running, and trust me, I know because I ran nearly 11 miles and I was just about knackered at the end of it, but you aren't thinking about yourself, you are thinking about, the person and the rest of the people who are waiting for you to come in so that they can go off and do their leg. And at the end of that race, we all gathered behind our last runner who had 3 minutes to make it over the finish line for us to qualify for completing the race, and we brought him home over the line. And I think that was just a phenomenal exercise. And I'd encourage any business or anyone who's listening to this to try to think about a way to encourage sport within their business, because it just I think shapes so much thinking, leadership, strategy, teamwork, positive morale. And it doesn't need to be something like triathlon or like a marathon. It could be walking, it could be, doing a rounders day with your team, but something that everyone can participate and be a part of, I think is just so important, particularly now, particularly given the year that we've had. And even where you have remote workers in other jurisdictions, which we have as well, there will be ways to include them in those sorts of activities through use of technology like Strava or other apps.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you mentioned leadership there, and one of the subjects I'd love to touch on with you is Love Tech. So this webinar series of the next couple of days is Bright Future, and many people in the industry won't know that there is an initiative on the Isle of Man called Love Tech, which is run by a number of extraordinary women on the island, name-checking Roberta Castle Contentate, Lisa Karen, yourself, and plenty of others. And it would be great to find out a little bit more about that initiative, because, that's about shaping future leaders through getting involved in STEM subjects, right?
Yes, that's right. So we are a charity that it was founded here on the Isle of Man, and effectively it was set up to encourage and inspire young girls especially to be involved in STEM. So to understand that opportunities exist equally for girls and boys alike, and to just I suppose inspire them through education, through events. And that's really what we do here on the Isle of Man. So we tailor events for all different age groups. We do things with parents as well to educate them. But I think the intention is very much to lead by example. So nobody is excluded from events, whilst, our aim is to I suppose, bring some parity to the table to say, well, actually, traditionally, there may be a conception that certain subjects are only for boys, or certain jobs are only for boys, and other things are only for girls. Actually, that's not the case. There is loads of opportunity, and we try to showcase, mentors who are very successful in their own right, who are women involved in really interesting careers across those STEM fields, and really just try to lead by example. So we don't make, a big deal about the fact that it may be a woman speaking or a man speaking or whatever the case may be, but we try to say, well, actually, this opportunity exists for everyone. And I think probably the best feedback we've had was from a young girl who was probably only, I think, 7 or 8 years old, when I asked a question at the end of one of the events to say, well, what did you learn from this? And she stuck her hand up with great enthusiasm and said, that I can be whatever I want to be. And I thought, yes, that's exactly the message. If someone had said to me, years ago, a good piece of advice, I think that would be to just be brave, to have confidence in yourself and to just, say yes to things, push yourself outside of your comfort zone. Put yourself forward for things that maybe make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. I know you and I were talking about doing this session before and going, oh my word, who actually wants to do this? It's there are going to be loads of people watching us. What if we make a mistake? But at the end of the day, I think if somebody can learn something from this, from our mistakes or from, what we have to offer by way of advice, if just one person takes value out of this, then our job is done. So that's the kind of example we try to set.
For people watching, I did say to Jade before the session that I've never spent so much time thinking about Jade, especially in my dreams, preparing for this session, because you're right, it's like pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. I don't do public speaking, and it's about taking those leaps, aren't they? So but going back to let's go to diversity for a second. So we've got people like Kelly and Christina from All In Diversity Project who have really been a force to help create diversity and inclusion within the gaming industry. Have you personally had any challenges yourself? Have you experienced anything, maybe not within the business that you're working with, but maybe working with partners, because maybe there hasn't been enough gender recognition or opportunities for women?
Yeah, I think everyone has. And I think whether you're a male or female, you've probably experienced, your own challenges by way of diversity. I think for me, yes, throughout my career, even in South Africa, people would look at me and say, oh gosh, you're really young and you're a woman. Could you be involved in the sector? How does that work? And I've never been offended by that, because I'm sure that I've said things, that have offended people, because I think you've got to be open to making mistakes, to learning from mistakes, and ultimately it's easy to offend somebody without even realizing it. But I think if you try to have a general awareness and educate yourself, then I think in some ways, that's a step in the right direction. And, yes, I've had loads of examples where people have just thought that I wasn't possible. It wasn't possible that I could do something or achieve something because I looked a certain way or because I was a certain age, and you can possibly know how to do all of those things. But actually, for me, again, if someone tells me I can't do something, that just lights a fire in my belly. So I've never been put off by that. If anything, I kind of seek out to prove them wrong. And again, I think actions speak louder than words. So to me, those sorts of things just really don't bother me. And sometimes it's not great if it's in a public setting. It can be slightly embarrassing, but I think, I'll show them. I don't need to say anything because I'll show them. And that's absolutely, the approach that I take. And I think some people certainly have not had opportunities given to them. I think I'm in a really fortunate position that I've worked really hard and I have been given an opportunity. So I do count myself very lucky. I've been around people that have listened to me, where I've had a voice, they've encouraged me. And so I think I do recognize I've been in an environment that has allowed me that freedom to flourish, if you like. And it's something that I'm quite passionate about. I think that's why the involvement in Love Tech and some of the other initiatives is because I do recognise that if you are encountering, I suppose challenges where people think you can't do something, but equally nobody's listening to you or you're not being given that opportunity, regardless of how hard you work or how much then that's got to be hugely frustrating. And I do recognise that does exist.
Yeah, no, I think we've been quite, I say lucky. If we're going to take anything positive out of, lockdowns and working from home, I think people have more access to more people in positions of leadership now because of this type of content that goes out. There might be somebody that's just newly joining the gaming industry, maybe working a compliance role, maybe not, but actually will be listening to this webinar and be inspired by the conversation we're having. And one of the questions I was going to ask you was, did you ever envisage you would become the managing director of a huge company? When actually now I'm starting to think that yes, you did, because you have that self-belief. And it's obviously instilled in you from your experiences that you've had in your career, which is phenomenal.
Yeah, I think did I ever think I'd be the MD here? Looking back on it years ago, well, I didn't know where I'd end up, but I think, yes, I did. I've got to be, like I said to you, I've always believed you've got to be self-aware. And so in my mind, I had a really clear roadmap of what I wanted to do. I didn't know where I would end up, but I knew that I wanted to be, a leader of a business. I knew what attributes I needed to have to be able to do that. And I had to develop and work on, myself to be able to get there. Um, Managing people, I think, is a big challenge. You've got loads of different personalities. To me, my role is very much to empower all of those personalities to be the very best that they can be. And so I had to do a lot of soul searching as well, to just make sure that I could be the very best version of that leader, and continue to work on myself to make sure that I can make, the team proud. And just make sure that our business can remain successful and that we can drive and pioneer things forward. So yes, I think you've got to have a goal in mind. You've got to work towards that. Once you've achieved that, I think again it's about pushing yourself out of that comfort zone, and also I think just being appreciative that it is a privileged position as well. So never rest on your laurels. Keep pushing on.
No, absolutely. And somebody told me recently that when you have a platform and you have a big network, then it's a responsibility also to use it, and to use it to share good messages, to inspire, to be available to people. Do you have any mentors yourself?
Oh, good question. I don't. I know a lot of people who will actually work really closely with business mentors, for example, and I wouldn't say I've got one person that I work with really closely, but I'm an avid reader. So I read loads of autobiographies. I like to learn from people, and I think there's not one person that I would learn from. There's so many of them. People's mistakes in business, I think you can learn a lot from. There are so many aspirational business leaders in the Isle of Man, old previous employers, old bosses that I've worked alongside, colleagues as well that I learn from. So I try to take, I think, learnings from everyone around me, and I've got some colleagues, here within the office that I take a lot of learnings from, sort of use as a sounding board. But I think you should never be afraid to admit that, and afraid to learn and collaborate with people. I think that that's so important. You're only as strong as the team that's around you. And I think, we've got to be humble, we've got to be honest with ourselves. And people have, lived in different situations, they've had different work experiences. And so if you can learn from the best of those and the worst of those and combine that with your way of thinking to shape a way forward, then that's what you should do. So yes, I mean, Michael Jordan, for example, is somebody who I just really look up to. I've read his autobiography, and I think many people have watched The Last Dance. Again, I think that's really insightful because of sports. So whilst nobody's perfect, I think a lot of the values he stands for, a lot of us can learn from. Shonda Rhimes wrote a book called The Year of Yes, and if people haven't read that, or if you don't like reading, watch her TED Talk. But I think when we speak about stepping outside of your comfort zone and just saying yes to things that otherwise you probably wouldn't have, that's an absolutely brilliant one. Elon Musk, again, I know, really intelligent man. He's made lots of mistakes, and again, someone that works really hard. So just so many, I could ramble on and on. If anyone's interested, drop me a note on LinkedIn and I'll send you a reading list after.
Okay, but I know we're a bit pushed for time now, but a question I did want to ask you is sliding doors moments. If you hadn't ended up, I'm half hoping you're going to tell me you're in a girl band of 16 and massive in Asia, and then it all fell to pot. You got number 68 in the charts or something. But is there anything else you would have been doing if you hadn't been doing this, or did you look for another career path at any point?
Yes, so I think if I wasn't doing this, I would probably be practicing as an RP lawyer. So that was initially what I set out to do in my career. I wanted to. I started in marketing, and I loved, branding. I worked with some of the very large international US brands involved in, the movie space, book space, and so on. And I was so interested in the RP aspects of that probably I would have gone into practice. wrongly or rightly. And I think the thought of that now, I'm thinking, oh, thank goodness I didn't do that, because it's a totally different world. And I love the diversity of what I do today. But I think that's probably what I would have been doing.
Oh, hoping for something like dog groomer or something a little bit like completely off the scale, something completely different.
I'm not that exciting.
Oh, listen, I can't wait to see you again. I can't wait for the border restrictions to be lifted and for us to hang out in Gibraltar or the Isle of Man. I don't care. I'll take anywhere. Jade.
Anywhere would be good.
Yes, hang out. And I just love to thank you for your time today. And thank you for everybody and anybody that tuned in to listen.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Sarah. I appreciate that. Thanks for listening, everyone.